Avalara have seen a 153% return on investment over 3 years and avoided 510 hours annually spent managing, streamlining, and filing tax returns? With Avalara, you're not only saving, you're investing. To learn more about saving with Avalara, check out our commissioned Total Economic Impact Study conducted by Forrester Consulting. Avalara, where tax compliance is done right.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another installment of ISV Success Live. I do want to shout out that this is actually episode 100. So it's hard to believe that we're actually hit 100, and it's kind of apropos because it's also the last Monday of Microsoft's fiscal year. And so I didn't time it that way. It just kind of happenstance was like that. So I just am looking forward to the dialogue with Nick from Avalara. But before we start with introductions and getting started, a few housekeeping items for those of you who've come across these, or maybe have never watched these ISV Success Live events in the past. So the purpose of these is really to showcase our amazing partner ecosystem. We know that there's a choice. We know there's a lot of vendors out there, including on different platforms. But what we wanted to do was really showcase the amazing work and innovation that our ISV ecosystem does, not just on the Microsoft Cloud, but very specifically to the Dynamics ecosystem. And so if you have a question, feel free to ask that live because this is a live show. So if you want to put that in the IM window, or not the IM window, the LinkedIn comments, we'll see it and have the ability to ask Nick potentially a question towards the end. But first and foremost, as you see in the little ticker symbol below, we'd love to hear where you're watching from. So if you're doing this from Texas, which Nick is doing this from, or for me, I'm actually in the same time zone. I'm actually, for those of you who've watched these shows in the past, you might be wondering, oh, wait a second, Brian's background is not the same. It's not a blurred background. It's not a specific background. I'm actually in our Chicago office visiting another partner this morning, but I wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to continue to have these dialogues that we do every Monday. And then finally, if the information is resonating with you, feel free to utilize one of the LinkedIn emoji icons, support, like, etc. That gives us an opportunity to also know that the information is resonating with you. So without further ado, Nick, thank you so much for allocating time on a Monday to speak with me, to share all the goodness of what Avalara does. So my first question I always ask my guests is, what's your role at Avalara? What do you do? And then what's one thing not on your LinkedIn profile that you're open to sharing as an icebreaker for everyone to get to know you a little bit better?
Sure. Well, thank you, and good morning, Brian. As you already shared, my name's Nick Mergo. I'm a Senior Strategic Alliance Manager, which is basically a fancy way of saying I manage the partner relationships. As you know, here at Avalara, our go-to-market strategy is through our partners, Microsoft, the SIs, GSIs, even specialty partners that focus on industries, and our accounting channels. So it's basically one of our guiding principles. We strive to be recognized instruments of our partner success, engaging, investing, and supporting them to create valuable relationships and mutually benefit our common customer. A fun fact, you'll like this, Brian, especially based off our last conversation. I was a former collegiate athlete. I was a linebacker at Texas A&M and a former 12th man. And if you know the A&M culture, we're not big fans of the color orange. And this is the second orange company that I've had to work with, as orange is the same colors as our in-state rivalry. So it's funny, I jokingly say when I'm speaking or in front of crowds, as far as wearing the orange, I kind of feel like a werewolf. I want to scratch it off of me and tear off the orange. But no, it's a great company, and orange has been our thing for a long time.
I love it, Nick. Yeah, we were doing the pre-show. We were talking a little bit about it because if you go to Nick's LinkedIn profile, you're going to notice that there is a kind of a college football theme there, and I love it because you think about Texas A&M and being from Seattle. The commonality, of course, is you have the 12th man, and there was a lot of debate going when Seattle Seahawks took on that also 12 and 12th man. How does that kind of overlap? But the subtle difference, for those of you who don't know, or maybe not even college football, the 11 players on a field at any single time. And so the 12th man, it was just a brilliant idea because it's like the crowd. It's like, hey, bringing in another player that's helping you go through it. But then, of course, in Seattle, we don't call it 12th man. We call it the 12s. And so just have 12. So it's super interesting, Nick. We didn't talk about that at the pre-show, but thank you for sharing that. That's an amazing insight. And yeah, we didn't get a chance to talk that you actually played college football. I personally did not. I can't imagine playing Division I, especially at the high level of intensity at Texas A&M, because for those of you who don't know, in the United States, Texas A&M is actually one of the premier college football types of venues, experiences, etc. They always have a top recruiting class, all that good stuff. So it's good to see an alumni kind of comment and to a point about the other Texas school that's in Austin. I won't say the name, but
right. Thank you.
In Austin. Yeah, it's super fascinating. It would be super hard. It'd be the same thing because I'm not a Washington Husky fan. I'm as we talked about, Oregon fan. And so wearing purple would be very hard for me if I had to wear pure purple.
Right.
Anyway, so let me do a quick shout out for someone who did make a comment. So to me, I thank you so much for making the time from Seattle. Truly appreciate you taking the time to listen. So Nick, why don't we go to the next question, which is, for those who are listening or maybe watch the replay who never heard of Avalara before, most people have, at least, of course. If it has to do with anything in business that has to do with taxes, you probably have heard of Avalara before, or even their unique experience when you go to events on all this stuff. They usually have an amazing booth experience at events. So why don't you spend a few minutes and talking about, Nick, what are the business outcomes? And when you say make tax less taxing, maybe describe to the people, the audience listening, what does that even mean, and what are the value business outcomes that Avalara really helps provide with our joint customers?
Sure. So we're focused on the complexity around tax. And I jokingly say that tax departments are usually sometimes the redheaded stepchild in most organizations. They are forgotten when you consider business applications like ERP or digital transformation. Biz apps basically are trying to drive some sort of outcome, whether that's efficiencies within an organization, whether that's additional revenue, whether that's ease of use across their employees. So when you want to grow into new markets or sell your products online, B2B, B2C, usually they don't ask the tax department's permission. Okay. And kind of the side effects to that is that tax departments have to regulate what are the licenses they maintain. Can you sell those products in that state or that country? Can you sell those products online? And what's the thresholds that they need to hit from that? And I always tell people, look, I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on, Democrat or Republican, there's one fundamental truth out there. The government never knows how to balance their checkbook. So they're always tweaking the tax system backwards and forwards, and it makes it very complex on a tax department. So you look at licensing and registration fees, sales tax exemptions, certificates that get involved in that, sales and use tax, consumer use tax, property tax, 1099, W-9, specialty taxes like excise and communications, or even like international tax, VAT, this new e-invoicing movement that's going on in Europe, and it's expanding into Asia Pacific. Our CEO has shared his vision. Avalara wants to be part of every tax transaction in the world. And we're doing a really good job of adding modules and solutions to help automate and digitize that process for a lot of tax departments.
Gosh, well said, Nick. When you think about taxes, it's one of those things, and we were talking about it as we were prepping for this, the use cases you describe, and just like simple things, like you think of it in software, there's a tax on the software and there's a tax on the services.
Right.
And then each state or province or whatever it is has different rules and regulations around that. And it's amazing what Avalara does, because to your point, there's so many use cases, or not even use cases, scenarios that people have to maintain compliancy to. And you can't get around it. Everyone has to pay taxes, even us as a personal level. And I can relate to it because in Seattle, there is no, it's just interesting, which is why a lot of people, you move to Washington. There is no state income tax, which is interesting. It's one of the few states in the United States. However, there's a whole bunch of other taxes that you get paid for, especially we have one of the highest sales taxes on record. So I love what you just said, because if you are a business and you're thinking about how to make it easier, this is one of those scenarios to do it. So maybe before we get to the next question about the experience, what do people do without something like you, Nick? Like, is it Excel spreadsheets? What are the commonalities when you think about the finance department or people managing taxes? How do people typically manage manage it without an Avalara like solution? What's the legacy thing tool that people use?
We the most common thing we come across is that they have an old department that is used to manual processes. In essence, they have Excel spreadsheets. They're throwing resources at this. They're constantly looking it up. And in some cases, they're incorrect. They're filing incorrectly. They're running the risk of, hey, we're just going to take the risk of possibly getting an audit. And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So normally 6 months, 9 months, even a couple of years down the road, that auditor is going to pay you a visit. And it's crazy. We talk about how COVID has modernized our life. More and more people are working from home. They're using, conferencing, scheduling solutions like Teams, like Zoom calls in order to get their work done. They're trying to be more productive. Well, in the same sense, same thing happened as far as across the state auditors. They don't have to pay you a personal visit. They can virtually basically send you an email and say, next week, I want to audit these transactions from 3 years ago.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's interesting to say that, Nick. Imagine getting a little IM ping or an email from a tax auditor from your local state government. Hey, I'm going to want to set up a virtual team meeting with you to start to audit all these past transactions.
Exactly.
Yeah. So thank you. Let me do a quick shout out for a few other people who made a comment. So Luz, thank you so much. Another person from watching from Seattle. I appreciate making the time. We appreciate you making the time. And then John O'Donnell, thank you so much from Cincinnati and the shout out of making this episode 100. So the next question is, because Avalara, of course, I know Avalara well because they're also, for those of you who aren't familiar, they're also based in Seattle. Originally, I think the legacy was, or kind of the past history, I think it was Bainbridge Island when it kind of first started. And for those of you who don't know the Seattle area, there is a lot of water around Seattle. And of course, Bainbridge Island's on the other side of the Puget Sound. And so maybe you could talk about what's the partner experience been like, because of course, Avalara has been part of the Microsoft ecosystem and providing so much value. When you think about it, it's not just finance and operations. It's also the CRM side, or customer engagement, and Business Central. One of the things that we typically talk about, of course, are enterprise offerings, but Avalara does have solutions around the entire Dynamics platform. So maybe you could talk a little bit about just what the partner experience has been like from your perspective, because you manage the relationship with Microsoft. What's that partner experience been like for you?
Yeah, I will share. It's been amazing. So we just celebrated our 20th year in business. And Microsoft was one of the first platforms that we went after. As a matter of fact, going all the way back to some of the convergence conferences. So as you mentioned, we were always noticed as the vendor that had the tiki huts. We had the surfboards. And then, of course, we were famously known for the margarita machines. I laugh because I've only really been in this space managing the partner relationship for the last couple of years. But I actually worked for Microsoft and worked for a couple of the ISVs out there, and I'm familiar with Avalara's story and the success that they have. We have probably the most connectors across the Microsoft ecosystem, 16 of them. So different platforms. And that's one of the things that we pride ourselves on, is our ability to basically integrate with your back office accounting, your system of record, your CRM tool, however you're keeping that data and maintaining that data. In addition to that, we've had some great stories across the ecosystem with our partner channels, all of the SIs and GSIs within the Microsoft ecosystem. So, currently today, we have about 30 million documents that we manage. We run probably about 34 billion transactions through our AvaTax and our API callouts. We've currently filed 4.1 million as far as returns. And then we have almost 41,000 customers across 75 different countries and offices, and we're growing. So, I mean, it's been a fun time to be part of the Microsoft ecosystem and work closely with them. It's funny, I go back to some of the earlier videos of our three founders, and they talk, in depth about, expanding into this market space. And we wanted to tackle a lot of that SMB or that mid-market and create kind of a beachhead with those customers. And Microsoft was at the forefront of a lot of that. So attending the various conferences, now it's Directions, Community Summit, Dynamics Con. So it's been a great event, and it's been mutually beneficial for both organizations.
Yeah, Nick, thank you so much, because that journey, essentially in pre-COVID, there were so many events, and you imagine, for those of you who've been in the Dynamics system for a long time, when you reference convergence, I miss kind of those days, because it's like that was the convergence of all Dynamics customers, partners, and it was a Microsoft event, but it was very specific to just Dynamics. And so I miss those days, because you're spot on. We were talking at pre-show, the amount of times I would go to one of those events every year, because it was annually, and I was like, oh, there's Avalara team, because you would stand up. To your point of orange, the orange, you could not miss it, because you were if not the only, and I can't remember it. Like every single time you go to walk a booth, you were there, because the orange was bright orange. It was right there. And it was well said, because the journey you've had, because of course we've had so much innovation in the dynamic side that Avalara has grown with it, from early on-prem days, because of course before everything went to the cloud, things were on-prem, especially our ERP offering. And so the scenarios that you've integrated to have evolved over time to make sure that is innovating as well as it can in regards to what we're doing and what Avalara is doing. And I love the way you commented on scale, because again, Avalara is a global company. Taxes just don't apply in the US. And so maybe to talk a little bit about just kind of the scale, because you talked about some of those numbers. That's very powerful, because it shows the ability for Avalara to scale at an enterprise level, because you're dealing with millions and millions of transactions. Because you think about an ERP kind of offering scenario with invoicing, and that whole process of when you are trying to, again, recognize something in regards to taking that cash or check or whatever that revenue is. Maybe you talk a little bit about the scale and kind of the enterprise global ability of Avalara across at a global scale.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, we recognized that a lot of the growth market was going to take place internationally. So looking at markets like Europe, Latin and South America, as well as Asia Pacific. And one of the trends that we noticed, this would have been about 4 or 5 years ago, is a movement that was going on, our mandate that the countries were passing along, which was this electronic invoicing. I mean, we've been familiar with that and GST for quite some time, and we had incorporated that solution within our platform. But as e-invoice mandates were coming out, it was common that a lot of the countries wanted their revenue faster. Rather than filing every month, they were looking at electronic invoices in a way for them to get that revenue back to the state. And then more importantly, catch people who weren't filing correctly. So it's difficult if I'm a company that's operating here in the United States and I want to expand my footprint and my marketplace into some of these international markets through an online or an e-commerce platform. I'm unfamiliar with how do I handle or address an e-invoicing mandate, say Italy or France, and how do I recognize that as far as within my ERP system or my point of sale system. It could be an e-commerce platform for that matter. And so what you end up doing is you get customers that'll go through the process of buying and purchasing your product, and then maybe after the fact finding out there's additional costs as far as the tax that was not calculated in there. Our solution helps you calculate that at that checkout point. That way that customer is fully informed and has that information. We want to empower both the customers as well as our partners, giving them that tax information. So tax departments don't have to look it up. They don't have to maintain it. And God forbid, if there is a change and when there is a change, they don't have to maintain those changes.
Yeah, well said, Nick. And I think you hit it spot on. How often, from your experience, how often does tax change? Like, I mean, we know currency changes daily. Like, how often that you've witnessed across the different things? Because again, at a global scale, I have to imagine that these tax rules in some countries or some things, municipalities, provinces, they probably change more than once a year. Because there's something that happens. So maybe before we get to my favorite questions, is maybe you could comment just really quickly on like the ability for Avalara to capture those things. So to your point, a tax organization inside of a company doesn't have to think about it, because just you're maintaining all that in real time.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those, hey, I set the tax rates and set it and forget it, and I don't have to worry about it. No, that's not the case. You've got tax holidays that always come into play. You always have basically taxes doing some sort of special jurisdiction passed in the middle of midnight, whether it's a fee for a road, a county, and keep in mind, I think, everyone should pay their fair share of taxes, but when the state doesn't give you a lot of time, or the county or municipality doesn't give you a lot of time to make those changes, you could be calculating incorrectly for months on end. One of my favorite stories, this sounds so ridiculous, but there was a mandate in the Tampa Bay area for an additional tax on pizzas, and it was affecting a big pizza chain. We don't have to mention names, but they didn't realize in this zip code area around Tampa and the area that they basically were having to collect a nickel tax on top of each of the pizzas sold within like a 45-day period.
Wow.
At the same time, there was an attorney that passed a class action lawsuit, said that the state hadn't passed out the mandate fast enough. So you had twofold. You had one where the business wasn't collecting that additional tax and paying it to the county. And then pretty much 6 months later, this attorney had passed, that issues a refund. So now you had to go back and look at each specific location. Did they pay that tax? Were they due a refund? And it created this whole mess. And so I always like to say we have an army of people. Their job is to maintain any tax changes, basically contact the states. And we actually work very closely with any of the departments of revenue, not just here in the United States, but as well as abroad.
I love it, Nick. And that's a good segue. It's a perfect segue into my favorite question, which is some customer stories. And I suspect that was probably an example of a customer situation where in real time, someone has to manage that and maintain it. And of course, what happens if someone's not maintaining it? One, audit scenarios, but two, someone's going to come after you for taxes. And where does that come from? Well, the company has to pay for it somehow. And so to your point, lost revenue because they may have been undercharging or not taking an opportunity to go do that. So maybe you can share in the few minutes we have left, because we do want to kind of do a kind of call to action, but maybe we can spend a few minutes talking about some of your favorite stories of what were companies doing pre and post Avalara and the outcomes they were experiencing.
Yeah, I will share. A lot of them, basically had, let's just say, an out-of-date, older system or resources that were manually filing that. Excel spreadsheets, Word documents. I mean, you can even jokingly say some of them even had a file cabinet or a trash bag full of exemption certificates that they just maintained, and they would look at them once a year from that standpoint. Not to stereotype, but Bill or Flo with their big chief tablet and their number 2 pencil, unfortunately in today's day and age is not getting it done. And to mention one of our customer success stories, Hickory Farms was a big Microsoft success story that we had a couple of years ago. And as you know, Hickory Farms is a leading retailer of, specialty type foods and products. And they were looking to expand as far as selling their products through an e-commerce platform, but also leveraging the Microsoft Dynamics F&O 365. And one of the things that they said is when they looked at solutions that were out there, they wanted a platform that could do everything well. Not just a few things good, like best of breed, and then try to combine all of them together. I wanted a solution that was kind of an end-to-end. So the challenge that they had was, one, on the front end, as far as that tax calculation, in addition to that, calculating exemption certificates, because Hickory Farms does sell to several government entities, nonprofit organizations, charities, to where they're not exposed to sales tax. So in that regards, it's like I need to be able to track that on average 10%, maybe 15% of our business customers that do not have to pay sales tax on those specific products. And then also adding to that complexity, they were, for the most part, focused on being a food store, but then they sold a lot of non-food products within these packages. So that gets treated differently as far as a tax, depending on the state, county, or municipality that you operate in. So in that regards, they needed a robust solution to be able to provide those tax rates and that calculation in sub-second time periods. That way, customers who are looking online or calling in and filling out an invoice, purchasing it, can immediately know what the tax impact is going to be.
Yeah, well said, Nick. And I love that example. I mean, we laugh, but sometimes it is kind of one of those things where someone maintaining those tax certificates or what you were referring to in a paper bag or in a filing cabinet somewhere, I have a tax guy, again, side dialogue. I have a person that does our taxes because I like to outsource stuff, and so I have a tax guy that I go to. And my first time I met him and I went to his office, there were just reams and reams of stuff. I'm like, how do you organize this stuff? He was really good at what he did. And that's what you're referring to, is that visual that you just said. I can imagine in sometimes these companies, there's these tax departments that probably has reams of stuff sitting somewhere, and they're only doing it, and it's paper based, not electronic based. And I think everything you just said is spot on for those listening to the replay or watching live. That use case scenario where there's a better way to do it, make it more efficient, and make sure that when things do change in real time, some of those comments you made during the dialogue is so impactful, because that's what Avalara does, is being able to provide those things. And goes back into your coin phrase of make tax less taxing. Those are things that really help to automate some of those scenarios.
Well, and Brian, if I can add,
sure, please.
We don't want to beat up too much on the tax departments, because they do a wonderful job with that. But I also, when I speak to a lot of companies that are considering our solution, I tell them, we want to make your job a lot more efficient. Okay. Mm-hmm. You don't want to be doing manual entry. You don't want to be basically filing processes or looking for this exemption certificate or that exemption certificate, validating it. It's like our solution drives efficiency within your organization. And with that, for them, it's like, okay, now my job's easier. I don't have to stay up here late at night at the end of the month, making sure that our filing is correct so we don't get audited.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's well said. It's to make people more efficient. I think that's the biggest thing, is that's where technology is at its best, is where you have your set of resources, and those resources can be very, very well used when they're doing stuff. And in the unforeseen event that you do get audited, the information of being able to do that more quickly, to come back with something is probably much easier. So with that being said, Nick, why don't you describe, I always, of course, as we wrap up the show, talk about what next steps can people take? Because we typically have Microsoft sellers listening to this. We have partners, because, of course, we do have a lot of software integrators that do implementations, and this probably pops up when they're doing things. And then potentially an end customer or a buyer could come across and going, oh, this is super interesting. I'm writing this today. What are recommendations as next steps or ways to get involved in? I will say on LinkedIn, feel free to connect with Nick, because this is on LinkedIn. One of the best ways is send him a LinkedIn connection request or a message offline. That's one way to do it. But what would you recommend, Nick, for people to learn more about Avalara and taking next steps?
Well, you're going to make me more popular than I probably need to be. But yeah, definitely you can connect with me via LinkedIn. But I strongly encourage, we're easy to find. Avalara is out there, and our marketing team does an outstanding job in making sure we're front and center. Probably one of the easiest and most productive use of your time is, there's a link included as far as in this video, as far as the Forrester report. I would encourage you to download that Forrester report. It really dives into the value add that our solution brings to your organization. And we interviewed basically 6 key customers, and we looked at the economic impact as far as their organization and the improvement across ROI. I'm reminded of when I actually worked for Microsoft and I was in the ERP department. There was an old mentor of mine who sat down with me and he says, look, technology needs to be driving additional revenue, improving efficiencies within an organization, or reducing risk. And if you're not hitting on one or two or all of those, then you're not really impacting or helping the customer. Why should they buy your solution? And I truly believe here at Avalara, we hit on all 3 of those. So yes, reach out to me. Yes, please download the Forrester report if you can. Or as far as the partner ecosystem, you have a SAM similar to me that manages that relationship. Certainly reach out to us, and we're happy to point you in the right direction. They can help get you started. And customers, we're always welcoming additional customers, because it's kind of the lifeblood of our business.
Yeah, well said, Nick. And I put a couple of other things in there in addition to the Forrester report. This site, aka.ms/Avalara, goes directly to one of your many listings on AppSource that has tight integration to the Dynamics platform. And then finally, this is a little bit of a mouthful, but if you want to take a screen for people listening live or in a replay, screenshot of this truly shows some of that integration between Avalara and Microsoft Dynamics scenarios. And we are going to run a video at the end, because there is one that actually, again, teases out similar to the very one at the beginning. teases out some of that capability. But as we wrap up the show, Nick, any final comments or things to close out on?
Well, obviously, as being your 100th podcast or LinkedIn cast, I think that's amazing. We talked a little bit about that. That shows the consistency. And thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and your guests. And I wouldn't be doing any disservice. So I've got a cheer for my Aggies tonight as far as the College World Series. So gig them.
That's right.
Gig them.
Yeah, no, I love it, Nick. Yeah, I was going to say that because they are for those who are college football fans or paying attention, Texas A&M against Tennessee. So Tennessee is another big college snap. And speaking of orange, it's an orange. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's it is yet another orange. So yeah, I'm rooting. Good luck in that, Nick. Because again, I'm a very passionate college football, anything sports related. So good luck to your specific team. Thank you so much for making the time. Truly grateful for the long-standing partnership we have with Avalara. So as we wrap up the show, team, this is our final one for this fiscal year. So stay tuned. There isn't going to be one next week because, of course, that's just before 4th of July. I'm personally going to recover. I'm taking some time off. There's some Microsoft stuff I have to take care of. So we're going to restart these things in late July. So if you're like, oh, hey, when's the next one, Brian? Well, the next one's not going to be for a few weeks because I am going to take a personal break. Not to the fact that we don't have more amazing ISVs to showcase, but just I'm taking a personal break for a few weeks before we launch them again in next fiscal year. So thank you, everyone, for making the time to watch. Thank you, Avalara. Thank you, Nick. And enjoy this quick video showcasing the capabilities. Thanks again, Nick.
Thank you.